Hey everybody, Lieutenant Joe here for the Blue Heart webcast. So today I wanted to talk about something that's interesting to every police officer, I hope. In the course of our jobs, we do have to investigate strange or suspicious death scenes. And strange or suspicious usually stems from the fact that somebody is deceased and we don't know exactly why. What happened to them, or there's some strange circumstances that go along with their death. So as I was researching this a little bit more, I thought back to an actual case that I had worked with my partners that was, we went to a lot of strange, suspicious deaths, and most of them have very simple explanations. Something happened that somebody had some kind of medical condition they weren't aware of, and that led to a cascading series of events where they ended up dead. And then we have to investigate, what happened to them? Why'd they end up like this? Well, one specific type of thing that we went to, we've all heard of autoerotic asphyxia. Now, when I teach a course on sexual assault investigation, we kind of delve into that topic a little bit. And I know it's something that we can giggle at, and you hear some of these stories and they're absolutely absurd because they're not normally things that we would engage in, okay? But they are part of a bigger part of humanity. So in my book, The Investigation, all right, from Blue 360 Media, I cover a really brutal double homicide. And in there, one of the areas that I talk about specifically, and I've done programs on this in the past, so you can go back and see, what is on the topic of drive crimes and want crimes. So we see that want crimes are the kind of things where they want something. They need money, they need for drugs, they got a drinking problem, they got a girlfriend problem, a gambling problem, and they need things, they want things. So they'll do a burglary if it's convenient. They'll break into your car. They'll rob somebody on the street. Those are kind of want crimes. But if they see a cop around or it looks like they might get caught, I don't want to go to jail, so I can put my want off. A drive crime, on the other hand, is the kind of thing that's constantly speaking to us in the back of our mind. So when we think of drive crimes, we think of things that are related to the human drives. And anybody who's been to my interview course or to my sexual assault course or the criminal investigation course, when we start to break these things down into human nature and why people do what they do, we have to understand these drive crimes. Well, one of the biggest drive crimes that cause problems for people, for the suspect in their life and for the victims, is the sexual drive. The human sexual drive motivates many, many things. Now, we all have a sex drive, and it's a spectrum, right? Some people are a very low sex drive. Some people have a very high sex drive, and then most of us are somewhere in the middle. But when that sex drive is perverted, or it twists, or it goes out of the normal boundaries of what's considered normal human sexual experience, we can have criminal problems. So you can have a serial rapist. They constantly go out and they're attacking people. You can have a serial killer that takes their victim, abuses them, kills them. Sometimes they come back and look at the body, they bruise the body, they take right. It's a very in-depth kind of a thing. That's a drive. That's something that they can put off for a little while, but that drive is staying there with them. And in the book, I talk about that. All right. So as investigators, we need to understand want crimes and drive crimes. Now, when it comes to suspicious deaths and strange death scenes, we need to look and see how this drive fits in with what's going on. All right, so I don't know, a specific case that led me to this, and I've written an article about it, and I wanted to let everybody know that I write for the Blue Magazine, thebluemagazine.com, the voice of law enforcement. Well, recently, the publisher and owner, Dan Duval, has honored me by designating me. I've been a writer for them for many, many years. He has designated me now as the Blue Magazine's criminal investigations expert. I'm very proud of that. The magazine is amazing, and I can't thank Dan and the whole team there enough for doing this. So I'm going to be featured on the website, and my articles and hopefully these podcasts and whatnot will all be on there. But recently I wrote this article about a case that I worked that was a strange death that you should be aware of, whether you're a patrol officer, a detective, a supervisor, it doesn't matter. We come across these things once in a while. So I had mentioned autoerotic asphyxia. We know that is a drive, a sexual drive that people have, that they like to compress their air, choke themselves, whether they're hanging or whether they're doing it with some other ligature or some other way to compress their air while they masturbate. And from what we hear from these people who live through the experience is that as their air is depleted, their sexual pleasure goes up. Very exciting. Doesn't seem that exciting to me, but this is part of the whole panoply of human sexuality. There's things that people like and other people don't like. And autoerotic asphyxia is real. Now, occasionally we will see autoerotic asphyxia when it comes to our attention. Somebody dies in the middle of it. Okay. So if you go to a criminal investigation course where they talk about these, and I do in mine, you see some strange scenes where people have multiple fetishes and fantasies. And they're doing autoerotic asphyxia, and they cannot stop the choking before they die. Whether it's they're hanging in the bathtub, people come home, they're hanging in the bathtub, and we see all kinds of other things that go with it. Or they tied themselves to a doorknob and they were beginning their pleasure cycle, and they ran out of air before they could loosen it up and start breathing. And that's when we find them as law enforcement. Families come home and they say, oh my God, what happened? He hung himself. And you get there, and we need to have some expertise in what we're looking at. Okay, what is it we're looking at? Was it someone committing suicide, which is, we know, fairly common. People commit suicide. Or was it some other strange activity they were engaging in that led to their death? So that strange, suspicious deaths we come across all the time. Well, many, many years ago, my partners and I investigated a case that I found to be very interesting, and that's what I wrote the article about around this topic. All right, so it's called Suspicious Deaths and Fetishes, Sexual Fetishes. Sexuality related to the human drive for sexuality leads to these kind of things. All right, so we had a 32-year-old man, lived in a garden apartment by himself. He had a girlfriend. He had a regular job. He liked to play sports. He seemed like an all-around, from what we found out about him, a seemingly normal guy, right? Well, his parents hadn't heard from him in a couple of days, and they were calling, and they didn't live in the same town, but they were calling. They couldn't get him on the phone, so they called the police and they said, "Could you do a welfare check on our son? Here's where he lives." So the patrol officer responded to the location, saw the man's car out front. Okay, went up, knocked on the door, got no answer, looked inside, some lights were on, but he didn't see anybody. So he asked the neighbors, did the right thing, investigated. Knocked, said, "Hey, do you know where, your neighbor next door is here?" And they said, "No, I haven't seen him in a couple of days, but, if his car is here, he's usually here." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So the officer tried a couple more. He looked around the other side, couldn't see anything. So he called for the building super, who came out with a key so they could access the apartment and go take a look and make sure the man was all right, that he didn't have a heart attack, he didn't have fall down or cut himself, who knows. So the officer goes in, and he doesn't see anybody in the living room, the kitchen. When he gets to the bedroom, and this is where it starts to get strange, and this is where we have to understand strange or suspicious deaths, he sees the young man laying on the ground, on the floor in the bedroom, and he's not moving, he's motionless. So the officer goes over and tries to roll him over, sees that the man's face is discolored, he has no pulse, he's not breathing, he's obviously dead and has been for some time. He also noticed some very strange circumstances of how the man was dressed. All right, and this is where this got really kind of strange. And again, people can chuckle at this when you hear about it. This is a real thing. Somebody was dead. And as investigators, we need to understand these things, why they happen and what happens. So what was strange about it? Well, the man was wearing a hockey helmet, and the helmet was snapped on really tight. That's strange. The man had a heavy coat, a heavy winter coat, and it was zipped all the way up, as high as he could get it, I guess. The officer also noticed that underneath that coat, there appeared to be an inflatable life vest, like you'd see on a boat, big orange inflatable vest. You know, you pull the thing, it fills up with air. That was underneath his jacket. So the officer, not familiar with what he was looking at, this is strange. Classified, if you're going to classify strange, this is pretty strange. So the officer deduces from what he sees, and he calls headquarters and he says, listen, I have a 1029, I have a deceased individual. Could you please send me detectives? Something's out of place here. So my partners and I respond to the apartment and we talk to the patrol officer. While we're on our way over, he calls us on the phone. He says, listen, I think this guy probably died from some kind of injury playing sports. You know, he's got a hockey helmet on. Maybe he got hit in the head and came home and died. You know, maybe he had an aneurysm, concussion, who knows? That was what the officer deduced from what he was looking at, because he didn't have any experience beyond that with what he might be looking at. That's why I'm telling you about it. So we got there and we walked in and we noticed this situation. And obviously, this was not a hockey-related injury. You know, you can look at the simple things. And I don't fault the officer. He was trying to figure out this really strange situation. What do I have here, right? If the guy had gotten hurt while he was playing hockey, say he was out at the rink with his buddies and he got hit in the head with a puck, whatever, why would he still have the helmet on when he got home? That would make no sense whatsoever. What's up with the jacket? What's up with the inflatable vest? All of these things start to add up as strange and bizarre. Well, the long and short of this incident was, once we investigated this further, we found that the guy was wearing a hockey helmet buttoned down really tight. He was wearing a heavy coat zipped up really tight. He had the inflatable vest underneath that he had pulled the handle and it inflated really tight and compressed. When he was removed from that clothing, we found underneath all of that, the man had taken a kiddie pool. You know those plastic kiddie pools that you blow up and the little kids splash around in? He had taken one of them and cut it up into the shape of a vest, melted it together, and he had inflated that. Then he put on the professional inflatable vest. Then he put on the coat. And what we're surmising was that he was involved in a sexual compression fantasy, fetish kind of a thing. That's what he liked. He liked to be compressed. Now, this was strange. You know, you don't see a lot of people involved in this, but we surmised that what happened was he put on the first vest, he put on the second vest, he put on the helmet, he zipped up his jacket, and then he pulled the ring to inflate the vest to really increase that compression. And then he was probably going to engage in some type of sexual activity with himself. And unfortunately, when that inflatable vest inflated, it cut off his air supply. And we saw some indications that he had been scratching at the neck, trying to get it off. And unfortunately, it cut off his air. He went unconscious and then he died. Now, you talk about a strange situation. Well, one of the things that we found in his apartment was a stack of commercially made magazines, right? These were not things, you know, you get off the internet. These are something he paid a subscription for or bought them in a store somewhere, all about compression fetishes and all different stories of people who do different things to enhance that feeling of compression. And there was a whole stack of these. So we started to understand what happened here. The guy was engaged in this sexual fetish of compression, and it got out of hand and he died. Now, like I said, this is some of the strange kind of things. The medical examiner classified his death as death by misadventure, accidental, because it didn't appear that he meant to do this. He was just engaged in this activity and he ended up dying. The key is you can come across one of these things. You never know when and where you're going to come across a thing like this, but you want to be aware that it's out there. So I wrote this article. It'll be on the Blue magazine at some point. If you want a copy of it now, it's pretty interesting. And I'm putting together a training course that I'm going to do about it as part of my sexual assault investigation course. But you can reach out to me at joe@pangarotraining.com, joe@pangarotraining.com, or my new email address for the magazine, joepangaro@thebluemagazine.com. Either way, you can reach out, and I'll send you a copy of the article now before it hits the magazine. All right, so I put this together so that you would understand these things that are out there. Now, some of the things we found in our research through these magazines and through dealing with psychiatrists and people who deal with people who have these kind of sexual fetishes that interfere with their life. All right, it's one thing you do something in your bedroom when nobody's around, you want to do it, you like it. Remember, there's that spectrum of sexual activity. When it starts to interfere with your life, or you start to involve other people who don't consent to these kind of things, that's when it becomes criminal, not just death by misadventure or some kind of injury you can do to yourself. So as we looked in this, there are lots of examples of people who will engage together. A couple will engage together because they like this. We saw one where a guy and his wife just were so excited sexually of the idea of compression that he would wrap her up with cellophane in the morning before work. He would wrap her all up nice and tight so she could hardly move, even went around her face and put a breathing tube in. Right? Now you say that's bizarre. That is bizarre. Okay, that's strange, but that's part of that panoply of human sexuality. That's why we have to understand it. That drive is so strong, it does often lead to criminal activity and, unfortunately, unexpected. So in this particular instance we had learned about, the guy was going to go to work and his wife was going to stay like that all day, and that would build up their sexual energy. He would come home and they would, do what they were going to do, but they were all charged up because of it. Well, she got uncomfortable during the day and she wanted to hop outside to get some air, and she fell in the pool and she drowned. And that's how the officers found her when they got home, wrapped in cellophane with a tube sticking out of her mouth. Now imagine if you came upon that scene, what would you be thinking? Right? And I know, like I said, I know this stuff can be funny. It can sound funny. We're professionals. This is part of the human experience. We have to understand it, right? Because you're going to come across some of this in your career. Sometimes not very often, but when you do, you want to know about it. So that's what I want to talk about today. And invite you to get the book, right? I have this book, The Investigation, and also my book on interview techniques, how to be a good interviewer. And you get them both from blue360media.com or on Amazon. And remember, ring the bell, whatever they tell you. Like, subscribe, tell your friends about the channel. We're trying to learn things together here. That's the whole idea, that we get better at what we do. We provide a great police service. And I want to thank you all for paying attention. And let's hope you have a great, safe career.